I sound like a commercial. Cynthia, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Okay. I can hear you. I'm not sure if everybody else can hear us, though.
Okay.
Okay, you guys can hear us. So that is awesome. So if you guys just want to type in the chat feature where you're calling from, I just want to make sure that this is kind of my voice check here to make sure before we start. This is also the way that you guys are going to interact with Cynthia today. So if you guys have any questions at all, just type them in the chat feature, and during our break with Cynthia, we will ask her the questions that you come up with. And we definitely want you to ask questions because that's part of the whole lunch with NEMA routine. So as some of you guys know, Cynthia is the director of the Museum Studies program at Tufts University, and she's also the editor-in-chief of the Museum Education Roundtable's Journal of Museum Education. You can tell she writes a lot. So Cynthia, I'm going to push it off to you. If you want to describe yourself a little bit more before we get going, that would be great.
Okay. Actually, I'm so distracted by seeing all the people that are listening. Hi, everyone. I know all of you. So this is really cool. I'm very pleased to be here and very glad that you are too. Since you can't see me in person, I thought that I'd at least start with a photo of me. So I actually wasn't going to talk about me a whole lot. If you have questions, you can ask that later. So my love of writing was shaped by an early professional experience. I was hired to write the background essays for an old Sturbridge Village publication for teachers, the Small Town Source Book. It came in volume 1 and volume 2. In the process of doing historical research for this background essay, using primary sources, I came up with an insight, and it was a ridiculously exciting moment for me to have an original thought that enabled me to understand 19th century New England in a new way, and then to share that with teachers. So I'm not going to tell you what that thought was because it wasn't terribly earth-shattering or significant, but what it did was it charged me with enthusiasm for thinking and original thinking, and then writing to share my thinking. So I was lucky to have that moment early on in my career, but it really is never too late. Writing is a skill that you can keep honing forever. And unlike all the other things that you have to give up when you get old, tennis because your knees are shot, or you have to give up driving when you can no longer see the stoplights, you can keep writing until you can no longer think. So what I have to say to you today emanates not only from my experience as a writer, but also as a teacher and as a journal editor. So this is the agenda that I intend to follow today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the value of writing, how to get started. I'm going to talk about the importance of making a point, the components of effective writing for writing articles and blogs. I'm going to talk about voice, and then I'm going to talk about writing specifically for magazines and peer-reviewed journals. So what I have to say is aimed at writing articles and blog posts and not reports or press releases or even exhibit labels, for each of those has its own requirements. As you can see, I've broken this talk into sections, and so I will ask if you have questions at the end of each section. Obviously, you can write your question in the box, and Heather will be keeping track of them, but I want to save answering questions until I come to sort of a natural stop in my talk. All right, so why write? So I think writing is thinking. It forces you to articulate your thoughts, and it makes concrete what was once ephemeral. Writing practices description and narration and argument and persuasion, which are all forms of communication that museum professionals use again and again. Writing requires contextualization. It makes you put your ideas into a larger frame, which helps you clarify and in turn argue and persuade. I write to clarify my own thinking. It may take many drafts, for I am not always clear about what I want to say when I start. Often my point emerges only well into my revisions. You hear that, students? You can't turn in the first draft. So I also think that writing is power. It stakes out your claim, it pushes it forward and out, and it can make you into an expert. Consider how Nina Simon developed her voice and her opinions and her prominence through her blog. So some people find it hard to write. They don't know where to begin, and other people think that they suffer from writer's block. The nice thing about computers, however, is that you can jump in anywhere and then later move things around. Writing today is not like the old days of typewriters when you had to think about order and organization before even starting to type. You can start in the middle. So here's a writing strategy to get started. Identify a problem, something you're mad about, something you're passionate about, or something you're puzzled about, and put it in the form of a letter, for then you are writing with a reader in mind. So here's my prompt. Dear boss, why don't you ever answer my emails? This prompt, which is a question, promotes thinking. And I say, why doesn't my boss answer my emails? Well, maybe he gets too many and mine get lost. Or maybe my emails are too long and she pushes them aside and forgets about them. Maybe she never checks her email. Maybe he doesn't understand the obligations of a supervisory relationship. Or maybe she doesn't know the etiquette of mailing. So any or all of these answers are worth writing about to flesh out. The question prompts answers, which prompt thinking. So using a letter as a starting point encourages you to think about writing as a conversation between you and your reader. And so after some writing and thinking about this issue, I may start to think, maybe this is a problem that is bigger than the dynamic between me and my boss, and perhaps others have written about this. So I go on the internet, I search for things, and hey, here's an open letter from a professor to students about email etiquette. Maybe this would help me articulate my thoughts more clearly. My point is that researching what others have to say about your topic is really critical to good writing. No one ever develops ideas in a vacuum. Okay, so here is another example of a prompt to get you thinking and writing. How can we convince visitors to look at the art and not their phones? Or my prompt could be, how could we encourage visitors to experience the here and now in the here and now? So once you have, a good question will generate thinking, which can then be a starting point for writing. There's nothing like a pet peeve to motivate you to write. So, questions on anything I've said so far, or anything that was unclear?
Cynthia, looks like you're good for now.
Okay. I will keep going then. Wait, I need a sip of water. 1 sec.
And don't forget, you guys, if you do have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box.
Or comments too. I'll take comments. Okay, so once you have your thoughts down on paper, you need to start to organize them. Oops, sorry. So without organization, the woods are dark, the trees obscure your destination, and there are a million paths to take. So one of the first ways to find your way out of the thicket is to determine your point. It's really essential to organize your writing around a point. This may seem obvious, but you'd be astonished at how many people submit articles to the Journal of Museum Education that are only reports. They are descriptions of excellent endeavors, but in the end, they are boring because they are only descriptive and they don't make any point. So what is a point? A point is a claim, is a premise, is a thesis. Well, these are all terms, all different ways of saying the same thing. It is a statement. And if we use our two previous writing prompts, we might come up with points like this. Email etiquette is an important professional tool to master. Or another point could be supervisors must bear the responsibility of facilitating two-way communication. For the second example I had, we might come up with a point of the increasing use of picture taking in museums is decreasing visitors' attention to art and objects. Or instead, our point or claim or premise or thesis might be the increasing use of picture taking in museums is increasing visitors' engagement with objects. So let me repeat, the point, the thesis, the claim, the premise is a statement. You need to make a full sentence of it that includes a verb and a period at the end. So I have one more piece of advice for getting started in writing, and that is write to your readers. Bill Littlefield, who was the host of the radio show Only a Game, explained that when he tells a sports story, he imagines that he is speaking to his mom and not sports fans. And I was delighted to hear this because I don't read about sports, I don't care about sports, but I loved his show, and I realized it was because he sort of had me in mind as his audience when he composed a story. So when you start to write, imagine a reader or readers. Imagining readers or readers will help you choose your message, your style, and your forum, that is where to publish. For instance, you'd write in a different way for family audiences than you would for young professionals. From working in museums, you know that you need to choose your words and your ideas and your style according to your audience's interests and abilities. But for some reason, sometimes what we learn about museum writing seems to go out the window when writing in other venues. So don't let that knowledge go. And also don't assume that academic writing is the goal for a traditional academic journal, because academic writing is often jargon-laden, dense, and boring. So any questions so far?
I think people might be afraid to be writing right now. We won't judge you.
And I'm not even going to read it. Only Heather. Okay, I'll keep going.
We do have some people typing. If you want to wait a second, or
okay.
we can continue. They stopped typing, so I would go ahead. And we could come back around to it.
Okay. Just know, folks, that I have covered the comment box, so I'm not distracted, and I'm letting Heather do the work. Okay, keeping going. So I'm going to talk about the structural components of writing. So these are things that should be part of an article or even a blog that you write. As I said, it needs to be constructed around a point, which is your premise, your thesis. It needs to have a problem statement, which is what problem does your point address. It needs to contain context, which is what does the reader need to know in order to understand the point and the problem. It needs evidence to back up your point. It needs an argument, which is persuading with evidence, and then you need a summary that restates your point and moves the reader forward. So I'm going to show you an example of how a blog post that I wrote makes use of the structural component. This is a 281-word post that I wrote in an email newsletter to students in August. And it's about writing. So I'm going to read it out loud, and then I'll show you how it breaks into the various components. So writing is a major form of currency in the academic world. It's obvious that scholars write books and articles to express their expertise and are rewarded for doing so, but students too must engage with this currency to succeed. The savvy student learns how to read the writing of others critically and actively in conversation with the author. This student is also rewarded for clear writing that effectively expresses ideas and demonstrates learning. Although some might argue that universities are over-reliant on writing as a way to assess students' progress, since many occupations don't require that skill, I defend writing. Writing is thinking. To write well is to think clearly. That's why it's so hard, said historian David McCullough. The act of writing forces the writer to make choices and to put thoughts in order. It helps the writer clarify opinions and find evidence to support claims. I think it makes sense to hone these skills in school, for who doesn't benefit from strategies that support clear thinking once out in the work world? Moreover, most museum jobs demand excellent writing skills. Curators write research-based essays that support exhibitions. Exhibition developers write label text. Collections managers must be meticulously correct in word choice and spelling, or collections will be unsearchable, essentially lost. Educators write lesson plans and create written materials for teachers, students, and visitors. Marketers write press releases. Everyone writes grants, which must be convincing and error-free. I hope that you can grow to love writing, if you don't already, and launch into assignments at school and in museums with enthusiasm, creativity, and expertise. It's a skill that you can continue to develop and enjoy throughout your life. Okay, so here's a color-coded breakdown of my blog, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I'm going to point out a few things. So first of all, the point, which is a sort of a coral color, an orangey color, is actually in two different places. The student is also rewarded for clear writing that effectively expresses ideas and demonstrates learning, and I defend writing. And it can be paraphrased, I think writing is very important to students while in school and in professional life. The problem in purple is not actually a problem statement. I didn't have room. Instead, I made a counter argument, which is some say we over-rely on writing. The context in blue provides the frame and can be summarized how the Academy values writing. Evidence backs up my point, and argument uses my point to convince, and in summing it up, I conclude and suggest a future outcome. I didn't consciously write with these components in mind, but I did check for them once I had a decent draft. So I want to be careful to reiterate, this is not a formula. And especially in short pieces that you write, you may need to leave out some of these components. Artful writing also combines them and mixes them up rather than making them discrete paragraphs in a specific order that each address a component. I'm going to switch to talk about voice now, but I wanted to know whether there are any questions about these components or about this analysis of my blog post.
I should mention to everybody that the slides will be available on the site afterwards. We've had a couple questions about some of your slides already and stuff like that, Cynthia, so I think people are definitely looking at that. And then we did have one comment from someone saying, academic writing sucked my voice right out of my writing. I think that's definitely something.
Yeah.
Honest, you know.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to do it when you are in the academic setting, but it's good to lose that when you get out.
Yep. Okay, so I think the other ones, looks like we have some multitaskers here today. So yeah, if you want to continue on, that would be great.
Okay, great. Okay, so voice. So note how I've used the personal pronoun here in this blog, but it's professional. I've distanced my opinions from my personal life. I haven't written about my cat or my family or that I hate Joni Mitchell's voice. That would not be appropriate for my audience of students and faculty in this particular venue. But the nice thing about blogs is that there are occasions when it's perfectly okay to be personal. For instance, this person wrote that she felt inspired to visit the Museum of Sex in the middle of my third trimester, partly because I like the visual of a pregnant lady wandering its halls, trying to put two and two together. A great image, a great story, and quite personal. Another example of the informal blog voice is this. Just recently, though, I noticed a little wooden tree hung with soft pretzels on top of their pastry display case thing. While I think of soft pretzels as hot dog cart food more than I do as fancy restaurant food, I thought, hey, I'll try a fancy pretzel. And holy crap, guys, they are, I think, the best pretzels in New York City. They are flaky, but I think that is at least partially coming from the consistency of the shaved, is that possible, salt flakes on the buttery, dark brown pretzel skin. Pretzel skin, ha ha ha, copyright. So the grammar and the punctuation in this are shot to hell, but that's kind of what makes it funny and very effective. It made me laugh to read it. So even the venerable New York Times, which has had a fairly conservative editorial and writing tradition, is going casual at times. The appeal of the road trip or the long through hike or the pilgrimage is that the point is so deliberately minimal to arrive at, end. And the decisions involve so banal, stop for gas now or in a bit, that the distinction between signal and noise is blurred. So this comes from this past weekend's New York Times Magazine, and the words and then the internal monologue about gas put this firmly in the casual school of writing. And I think it works. So in conclusion of this section, I urge you to develop your voice. I am a big proponent of the personal pronoun, even in formal writing. I think it's honest, and it usually is much easier to read and understand than something that is formal and distant. It also helps you create a narrative. So how do you find your voice? Well, start by paying attention to what you read. Decide what you like and also what you hate. It's good to develop different approaches to your voice. Create a formal voice and an informal voice, and pay attention to the style of the publication that you'd like to publish in. For instance, I would not accept a highly personal voice for the Journal of Museum Education, since it is a professional and academic style publication. I will accept the personal pronoun now. The other thing to do is to learn to write without using I, because occasionally there are publications that still don't use it. So you need to develop a bunch of strategies, but whenever possible, put yourself into your writing. Questions about voice?
Yes, we do. So how do you keep your voice in a piece that goes through multiple edits?
Are you talking about museum writing, which is group writing? You probably can't. However, if you're writing
other people's edits is what Abby brought up.
Stick to your gun and explain why you want that voice in there. Don't necessarily accept other people's edits as being right. My husband is my best editor, and there are times when he takes out informal, flippant, extra stuff because he's trying to pare it down to its essentials, and I just put them back. But it's worth having a discussion about. I ask him why he removed it, and then I explain why I want it in there, and it helps me figure out what's important and what comprises my voice, because I don't really always know. I just write and it sounds right, and if I have to defend it, then I can be clear about what my intentions are. So I think it's worth having a conversation with your editors. Hope that helps.
And then on the other side, I know we've all come across this one, is how can we create a voice for an organization, such as for marketing materials, when there might be multiple writers?
Yeah, I think that's really hard, and I don't really feel qualified to answer that because that's really about brand. I'd say that you could come up with an organizational voice and have a style guide about what you can and can't do. Or you could say, forget about having one voice, we're going to speak with multiple voices. But I think that needs to be an organizational decision. But it is doable, but it takes some negotiation and talking through. I wish I could think of an example of an organizational voice. I know I've come across one, but I can't think of one at the moment. Sorry.
Okay, and we have another one is, how do you balance the academic voice and the non-academic journalistic voice, especially in cases where one has to write for both worlds at the same time?
Well, I do think it's possible to write in the academic style and write well. One of the problems with academic writing is the convolutions to avoid using the personal pronoun often put sentences into the passive voice. And if you can avoid that, if you can still remain active, you don't always need to have I, the personal pronoun, driving things. So I'd say practice and experiment. I really do see more and more that the academic books and articles are increasingly using I. And so I'd say push for that and look for examples that you think are well regarded academically, and use those as models. And also use them to convince other people that this is acceptable, professional, and effective.
Okay, and this is a little bit of a follow-up on that one. Could you speak a little bit about active and passive voice?
Oh gosh, without my notes, it's hard to, but a passive voice is when something is done to you. Or to the subject, and an active voice is when the subject is, or when the subject is doing the action. So the coffee was given to me is a passive construction, and I took the coffee would be active, although they aren't exactly parallel. I think you get what I mean. I hope that helps.
So, yeah, my coworker Meg brought up the point. She is also a writer herself. If you can add by zombies to the sentence and it makes sense, it's passive voice.
Oh,
the soup was rewarmed by zombies.
Yes.
Sorry, a little humor here today.
That's great. Yeah, good.
Okay, so I think we're done with this section. If you have any more questions, just type them in and we could come back to them.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to move to writing for museum newsletters, magazines, or peer-reviewed journals. Why do it? So writing in that venue is usually more permanent than a blog, and it often has a print version, not always, but often. It may reach a well-defined audience with knowledge and opinions about your topic. Interest groups, members, etc. The more defined the group, the more interested they may be, and the easier it is to write for them, the less contextual stuff you need to provide. And finally, it gets your name out, beefs up your resume, shows potential employers that you are a force to be reckoned with in a field with a reputation and opinion and expertise. And that's in the museum world. In the academic world, publishing has a whole different set of goals and demands. So really I'm talking about museums here. So there are a lot of museum publications to choose from. You should get a sense of what kind of pieces they publish before you submit. You need to familiarize yourself with their submission guidelines and their deadlines. So don't ever, just as you'd never write a grant and send it to a funder without knowing something about what the funder funds, you need to do the same with publications. You need to look at them, see what kind of articles they publish, what styles they use, and really do your homework. So writing for museum magazines, as I said, gives you very great exposure in the field, but it's often short-lived because these publications are rarely indexed by databases. The publications are often very eager for submissions, and if you meet that criteria, you usually can get published. So there's a relatively low threshold for publication. And typical article types include case studies that are show and tell, how to do things, opinions, discussions of current events and issues. So I assume you all know what I mean by databases, like LexisNexis, Artful Text, JSTOR, all those compilations of article types, and there are a zillion databases, and different kinds of books and publications are indexed by different databases. A different kind of publication are the refereed museum journals. Journal of Museum Education is one of these. On the left, here it is, right here. So what happens in these journals is that submissions are reviewed by peers in what is usually a double-blind process. That means that when you submit, you never know who reviewed your writing, and in turn, the reviewer does not know your name. So it's a double blind, and its peers are colleagues who assess it for accuracy, for relevancy, and for its contribution to the field. And this means that your piece has to add to the discourse of those who came before you. It needs to build upon previous work. And as I said before, it has to have a thesis, and it has to be supported by research. These articles tend to be more scholarly, and they tend to be longer than what you'd find in a museum newsletter or magazine. So why go to all the extra work of writing for a journal? It has a much higher threshold. Well, it allows you to participate in a slowly evolving conversation over time, and it's a way to tackle tough issues that are not easily solved. It allows you to contribute your thoughts and research, and they may be used for decades. My students read articles written throughout the 20th century in my classes. You benefit from the publisher's reach and resources. And most peer-reviewed journals are now published by publishing houses with sophisticated resources for distribution, both online and print, indexing, and marketing. Publishers make money from library subscriptions, so they try to market their journals heavily. And so these articles are indexed, which means that readers can find them pretty easily. They don't have to just go to the journal. They can go to an index, and the keywords that you supply act as ways to discover your article. So the structure of a journal article has to start with an abstract, which is a summary of the findings, which think executive summary, and like an executive summary, you write it last. You don't write it first, you write it last. It should contain an introduction that contains a description of the problem you are trying to address, and it should have your thesis or your claim, and provide context, which could include gaps in the literature and what others have said. The body of the article has paragraphs organized around the points you are trying to make, and they support and explain your thesis. And finally, you have a conclusion that restates, summarizes, and pushes off into the future. And then sometimes, and usually, there's a bibliography and there's a biography, there are acknowledgments and figures such as photos or charts. So that's a typical structure of a typical journal article. So how can you get published in a journal? Well, you first should have something to say. You should, it should be more than show and tell. You need to know what others have said. As I said, you need to really build upon other people's work. And you need to do your homework. You need to research to see whether your argument's unique. You need to know who else has published something similar. You need to do homework to choose your venue carefully, making sure that the journal's purpose and audience align with your article's purpose and audience. And you need to follow the rules, which include meeting deadlines, formatting, and citation style. And did I mention you gotta follow the rules? You need to know what the word count is. You need to write well with correct grammar and spelling and punctuation. For instance, educator's rule, and educator's rule all mean different things. It's just that apostrophe that changes the meaning. So, and I say this because it's astonishing. I send out a guidelines to, and they're available on various websites to authors who submit to the journal. And it's amazing how many of them don't seem to read it and don't follow the rules. And, you know, technically I could reject it. Oftentimes there is something worth retrieving. And so I have to work with the author to make sure that it does conform to our styles. So, questions?
So far, how do you come about with like the special topics for, like an example would be Journal of Museum Education focus on X. So as an editor for that particular organization, that magazine, how do you come across what you're going to be writing on next or featuring next?
Good question. So the way we do it at JME, Journal of Museum Education, is that we solicit proposals from a potential guest editor or guest editors. And we ask that potential guest editor to, in a sense, write a proposal that contains the idea and explain how it fits into, how it serves the field, how it fits into previous discussions of this issue or the topic. And the proposal also contains ideas of who might write what. So it really is like a mini grant proposal, except we're not giving out money. And this proposal goes to the editorial committee of the Museum Education Roundtable, who either says yes or no, or hey, this is a good idea, and it needs more work. Eventually, when we accept a proposal, I work with the guest editor very closely to finesse the ideas and work with the authors. So the guest editor invites the authors generally. We rarely do an open call for articles on a topic. We may do that someday, but we have a tradition of the guest editors pulling together the authors. So that's how the guest edited sections occur. They are still peer reviewed, so sometimes an author who has been invited to contribute actually doesn't get published because it doesn't pass peer review. We also in the journal have, we take unsolicited articles on an ongoing basis, so we almost always have part of the journal that's dedicated to articles that are not part of the thematic section. Different journals do it in different ways. Some put out calls routinely when they come up with a topic.
Okay, and then how do we determine as a writer what style to use for less formal writing, such as blogs or magazine, like AP style, etc.?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning part of that. What was the first?
How do we determine what style to use for less formal writing, such as blogs or magazine?
Well, again,
like, what kind, like AP style, Chicago, you know?
Yeah, yeah, you need to look at the venue to see what is common there. I mean, footnotes are rarely used in blogs. Usually citations are active links, or, um, just put into the text. Personally, I use Chicago for everything because I think that it is the least distracting to have a number, at the end of a sentence that is linked to either footnotes or endnotes. I really, really, really don't like um, the style where citations are put in parentheses in the middle of a sentence. I find it very distracting and it interferes with readability. So that is my very strong opinion that is not necessarily shared by others and other publications. So you really need to look and see what's out there. I do think, however, it's really, really important to acknowledge where your ideas come from. So even in an informal setting, I think you need to find a way to link your ideas to others. I mean, that's how we gain and present information about the world. As I said before, we don't operate in a vacuum. Our ideas are all connected, and we need to acknowledge them. Other questions?
Um, no, that's good. I know, NEMA definitely has a call for papers and stuff like that on our website, which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation. But if you want to go on, these are great questions. Just one second, I do have another one. When building on the work of others, how do you choose who to build on site? Is it better to cite less known work that you agree with most, such as obscure learning model, for example, or well-known work that your reader will have a shared understanding of?
That's a great question, and I don't have an easy answer. One thing I always do is to try to make sure that the people that I'm quoting, or the works that I'm using are still highly regarded in the field. I often write about things that I don't know all that much about, or I'm still learning about, and so and I do this in my teaching too. I check out what the experts to say. Is this a good person to use? Is this still relevant, or have these ideas been superseded? So I would say just make sure that your sources are dependable, and then I would say probably a mix. I mean, it's good to quote sources that everyone's familiar with, but it's also good to bring to the forefront people whose voices are less well known. There's no reason not to do that. But I would say that uh, you would probably be doing yourself a disservice if you quoted the lesser known person if a better known person has also written about it. Then people would think you maybe don't know. So it's good to be kind of comprehensive.
So I don't know if this is opening Pandora's box or not, but what are your feelings on Wikipedia? Should it be used for anything?
Yes, I didn't think so when it first came out, but it's been proven to be pretty reliable. Um, I, you know, I, it, I use it a lot to introduce myself to a topic or to get an overview, but then I don't usually stop there. I go beyond. I use some of its sources, and dig deeper. So absolutely use it. I would say if you are publishing in an academic style journal like JME, I wouldn't use Wikipedia as your end source. So use it in your research process, but if for a citation, move beyond to what Wikipedia is based upon. Good question.
Okay, and do you think most of the journals that you mentioned earlier, do you think most public libraries actually have a subscription, either print or online, that people would be able to access if they don't have their own subscription?
So these, no, I mean, these are industry journals, and you probably won't find them in most public libraries. There are some of the bigger museums have group, what do you call it, a institutional subscription. academic libraries are likely to. So if you have access to an academic library, or you need to just subscribe yourself. I have subscriptions to many of these personally, even though I can get them through Tufts, because I just find them so useful in building my understanding of the field and building my own practice.
Okay, so we have one more question before we can move on. What reading level would you recommend for writing a local history column for a local paper?
Oh, interesting. You know, it's always said 8th grade, but I guess I never think of a reading level. I just try and write really clearly. And I try to choose words that many people understand, most people understand, although, you know, words are fabulous. And sometimes a complicated word is much more nuanced than a less complicated. And if I think it can be understood in the context that I use it in, I'll go ahead and use it, even if it's slightly obscure or harder. I also think that you have to go back to the question of what do my readers know already, and write to them. And so that should shape your writing more than a grade level, because something that, anyway, I'll stop there. I hope that helps.
Okay, so these are some great questions coming in. Keep them up, and Cynthia, I'll let you move on to your next slide.
Okay, where is my next slide? Okay, so after you publish, sadly, don't expect the world to fall at your feet, fawning with praise and adulation. In fact, don't be surprised if you never hear anything at all. I sometimes think that my writing is falling into a black hole, and am really gratified when one person every 5 years says, "Oh, that's interesting." So it doesn't mean that people haven't read your work. It just means that most of us are not really good about giving feedback to authors, even in our small field. But if you want people to talk about what you've written, if you want it to help you further your career actively, you need to take action yourself. And in fact, even some mainstream high profile publications, I should say even all mainstream high profile publications such as Newsweek and the Daily Beast require writers to promote themselves and their work. The pressure to self-promote is intense. Those words of wisdom came from my son, who does PR for a little boutique firm in New York City. He says that the world of publishing in popular venues has really changed, and now you're expected as a writer to tweet and to blog and to promote your work. So here's what you should do. You should use your existing network to promote your work. So you email your article or your blog or a link to friends and colleagues. They're the people who are most likely to care about what you have to say. Use social media outlets like LinkedIn, Twitter to get the word out further. Identify relevant blogs and send the article or the link to them. You could ask friends or colleagues to comment upon your work, perhaps raise an issue or ask a question or review. If you've written a book, you could start putting into motion someone who will review it in appropriate venues. You could offer to do a talk or a workshop related to your published piece, just like I'm doing now. And you could ask participants to read what you've written in advance, or you can give them copies to take home, or again, you could post a link. So you need to be very active. Meg, are you able to speak? Because you could tell them
Yes, I am. Hi there.
Hi, can you tell them what happened with the blog I wrote for Museum Education Roundtable? Because I took myself off Twitter, doing what I shouldn't do.
Sure, no problem. So in the absence of Cynthia being on
Twitter herself to promote the article. Some of the folks from MER who are kind of in charge of the social media did some pull quotes from the article, which got noticed on social media, and people were reblogging the link, talking about some of the major points. It also got reposted to Facebook through NEA and a few other places. So it kind of, got traction almost a full month after it was posted, but kind of the linking back to it meant that it got much bigger visibility, and the pull quotes in particular seemed to be the thing that really convinced people it was worth reading.
Thank you, Meg.
Was that what you were getting at, Cynthia?
Yes, perfect. And so if you are a social media illiterate or troglodyte like I am, like I just don't want to do it, have a posse, have other people who will do it for you. And I was extremely lucky that the Museum Education Roundtable folks picked this up and ran with it. So I wouldn't have done it better if I had done it myself. So, in conclusion, when you write to publish, you need to have something to say, something worth sharing. You need to write to your readers. No matter what kind of writing, it will affect your voice, the content, and the style. And you need to write. You need to add your voice to the discourse. Don't hang back. You have important things to say, and the museum field will never get better if no one shares their ideas. So please contribute. So I'm going to end here and say thank you, and are there more questions?
As people are typing in any last-minute questions, Meg, did you want to talk about our journal? Because we're really easy to get published.
Sure, absolutely. So our online journal, Knowing the Museums Now, has an open call for submissions. So we will go ahead and post the link for that. And basically, we are always looking for interesting content, whether that's a case study or something that has to do with one of the upcoming themes that we've decided on for the next couple of issues, whether that's an interview with someone you find interesting, a book review of something you've read recently and feel like other people in the field ought to know more about. So basically, if you have even just the kernel of an idea and you think there might be, an article in it, it could be anything from 500 to 2,500 words, and I am always happy to talk through options with people. So if you feel like, gee, I don't know if this is a full article or not, I encourage you to go ahead and get in touch with me, because I'm happy to do brainstorming and kind of throwing some ideas around to see what might come out of it. So if you think you might want to write, but you're not entirely sure, or you need a little kind of guidance on putting together an article, we're always happy to talk to people, and we love hearing from people in the field. As BJ says, we're always looking for good ideas and volunteers. NEMA is only as good as, the participation of our members. So.
Exactly. So can I tell you that this blog that I was talking about, and Meg was talking about, is in the Museum Education Roundtable website, and you can just Google that, but the URL is museumeducation.info. And it's called Own Your Expertise, but Know Where It Comes From. So if you want to see it, you can go there. No more questions.
It looks like our writing has dried up. I know, no more questions. Cynthia, I want to say thank you, and also I want to do a plug for the NEMA upcoming conference. Our early bird deadline is next Wednesday, coming up fast. We will be in Mystic, Connecticut, November 9th through the 11th. We hope that you could see it, and Meg just posted the link to the Museum Education Journal, and we do have lots of thank yous coming in, Cynthia, and we do want to say thank you and stuff like that for sharing your expertise today and everything. It was a great webinar.
Well, thank you, and it was a pleasure to talk to you all, and You made it much easier than I thought it would be, talking to my computer, by asking good questions and your comments. So keep writing.
All right, thanks everybody, and we hope to see you in the October lunch with NEMA. We will be talking to Data Arts about the culture data profile. One of my favorite subjects is data. All right, I'm kind of a geek when it comes to things like that. So we hope to see you guys in October for the lunch with NEMA, and then November for the conference down in Mystic. Until then, thanks.
Great. Bye-bye, everyone.